Good evening, everybody. It's 5:30 on the dot, so there's nothing like being punctual. So welcome. Thank you for joining. We have a bit of a funny old evening today. I am based in Melbourne and it's already been a huge day. So bravo for everybody to attend at this point so far. So no doubt it's been a big day for many people today. Whether you've had a full day in the classroom and you're coming home, perhaps you've got a nice cup of tea or a glass of wine next to you, or if you're in Melbourne, perhaps you're hiding under the doona hoping that the day will just swallow you up. And we also have registered listeners across Australia and even some overseas. So welcome everybody, good evening. I appreciate today that you've taken the time to listen. I conducted the same seminar this morning to an overwhelming number of early birds. And however, as I continue to do this seminar from my own lounge room, I'm very conscious tonight, being in Melbourne, that perhaps we're under some stricter time restraints. So I am going to keep things moving. As much as I'm a realist, I'm also an incredible optimist. And just like many of you, we might be a little bit weary of Zoom, but I'm hoping tonight that I can provoke some thought, some questions, and perhaps even some reflection on your own teaching pedagogy. The topic today is interpreting data into practice, and it's obviously sparked a lot of interest from many people who have registered. And I hope that we keep continuing with this interested momentum as we go through today's seminar, and I think we'll probably do a few more as we move on. For tonight, we're going to have our questions submitted through Slido, and the event code is here. And I'm going to have this information on all the slides as we go through tonight. So whenever you have a question, the Zoom chat box won't be working. It's through Slido. I encourage you all to keep your mics off. And if you feel like it suits you, I'd love to keep your cameras on. It just makes it a little bit more realistic, a little bit more friendly faces, but also if you are not in the best position, that's totally okay too. So we'll try and stick to 30 minutes. And at the end of the presentation, I hope to go through all of your questions and go through things in a lot more detail. Now's a good time to introduce myself. I'm an experienced teacher with about 15 years of teaching. Need to mute someone. There we are. I'm experienced in the methods of English and psychology in the public and private, and a short stint in the adult education sector. And I've recently returned from spending 4 years teaching at the Australian International School in Singapore. I share this with you as I have an authentic understanding of classroom teaching, its tremendous rewards, and of course, its challenges. We find ourselves at a very interesting time in education. We've got accelerated digital adoption, where technology is no longer optional in teaching. And I think what's really interesting with our current climate is that teaching has been viewed with a renewed sense of appreciation. In fact, there's probably been a celebration of the humanity of teaching. With lockdowns, mums and dads have had to actually teach their children, which we know is not always the same perception that they have. And I think what's the real beauty of that is there's a real acknowledgement that teaching is a diverse skill set, and it's highly specialised. And I think it's that's actually taken me to my current role at Neap as Head of Digital Learning Innovation. I think when we think about technology and innovations, and especially the climate at the moment, this really resonates with me, this quote, that technology can transform our teaching, but it cannot transcend the teacher. And I think that comes back to that real celebration of what it takes to be a good teacher. And I think when we look at EdTech, the simple goals should be to harness working smarter, to support student engagement, and to speed up or eliminate manual work processes. Teachers can be creatures of habit, and a lot of our workflow is still very manually orientated. And I think the real gift that technology can bring to teaching is that it can make these three things happen. Not all innovations to teaching should be adopted straight away. We need to evaluate them in terms of what they bring to our teaching and learning. And they can often be categorized into two groups: content delivery and assessment. I think we're all very familiar with immersing ourselves in a new technology, a new app, a new digital platform, a new content delivery system that's meant to change the way we teach. And I think after we invest our time in those things, we've reimagined our curriculum, we look at new assessment tasks. And in the end, I think the real question we need to ask ourselves is evaluating, has this had a positive impact on our students' learning? And I think that's where we come to this here. So when we're looking at innovations in education, it's important we ask ourselves these three questions. Does the innovation fit with my teaching pedagogy? And pedagogy being such a big word, I think if we unpack it, it really comes down to our teaching methods. Essentially, this is, what do I do in my classroom that influences teaching? It's a very big question, and one that hopefully we get a bit of time to actually think about. And when we're forced to, be innovative and pivot and change, just as we are right now, these questions become really important. The second one here, in my new role, obviously working with schools, this is something that I pay a lot of attention to. So does the innovation fit with the current school priorities? And when we talk about that, there's things like, is your school promoting student agency? Is that a real feature of your focus this next 12 months in your curriculum and your student engagement procedures and protocols? Are you looking at the notion of supporting digital natives? And again, tonight, these really resonate with me, as these are, high on the agenda of schools, more so now than ever before. We also talk about school girls in STEM and the 21st century critical thinking skills. And I think another really prominent priority for schools is differentiated learning pathways. So, I think when we think about these priorities, it then leads us to this third question. So how do we know that innovation will enhance our teaching? And that's the core about why we're here and what we're doing. And the answer to that is evidence. Good teachers use evidence. And the term evidence is firmly entrenched in our education lexicon, and with good reason. So improvements in student learning and educational outcomes depend on the wider use of reliable evidence in classroom practice. We need evidence to establish where students are in their learning, to decide on the teaching strategies and interventions that we need to do, and then monitor and evaluate their growth. And I think that's with accelerated digital adoption, gathering evidence is faster and quicker than ever. So the purpose of today is, what existing data do we have access to inform our teaching? And with current innovations to education making collecting data easier, we'll discuss how this can affect our teaching. Ultimately, we're discussing the importance of interpreting data into our practice. When we look at the rigorous objective types of data, so the data and the evidence that I'm talking about can be split into two categories. We have the objective data and the subjective data, which is our classroom data. And when we look at this here, we've got the FISO frameworks from a Victorian perspective. We also have the high impact teaching strategies, which New South Wales also have. And this has come from hundreds of research studies conducted by Robert Marzano and John Hattie, which are synthesized into 10 teaching strategies that we know impact learning in a positive way. And we can see probably one of the most important ones here in terms of our focus today is differentiated teaching. Other objective data that we have is our NAPLAN, our National Numeracy and Literacy data that we know very well about, and the PISA scores. So we can, obviously, this is reflecting Australia's educational scores and procedures in terms of a worldwide ranking. And we'd all be familiar with, obviously, Alan Tudge's recent comments about Australia's recent decline in our score on our PISA ranking. I think also we have our VCAA subject reports, and HSC, you also have those as well. When I put my psychology teacher hat on, these were the reports that I would review at the end of the year and see how my own class scored amongst the state averages, and see obviously where the weaknesses were, the areas that my class did well, and have a look at the examiner's feedback. So it informed my teaching. We also have the PAT tests, and obviously we have behavioural and learning assessments done from external partners as well. So aptitude, attitude and achievement tests, which all of this data is clinical data, it's objective, and it does play a part in our teaching and informing the way that we deliver our content. One element that consistently stands out is that we're told that good teachers use evidence, and using evidence to adopt a whole school approach to differentiated learning makes the biggest difference. And that's something that I think when we're looking at excellence in teaching, we're constantly looking at evidence and differentiation. And the question then that we're posing is, if we're looking and focus so much about differentiation, why do we offer so many standardized tests? When we're looking at the second types of data that we have, it's more subjective classroom data. And this is gathering visible, making learning visible, as Hattie says. And this is part of our daily practice. This is what we do without even knowing. We're collecting, recording, listening, talking, formative assessment, summative assessment. This all becomes part of our daily practice. And when we look at this graph here, I think this is feedback from teachers. The most extremely useful information is this one here, the teacher's own systematic classroom observations. And that's what we find informs our teaching and creates most interest. And I think that's what we answer these questions. What does my student know? Where does my student need to go? And how am I going to get them there? And this is the information that contributes most highly to that. It's interesting to note that some of the standardized tests are what teachers actually report as being, the least useful. So whether we can agree or disagree with the notions of NAPLAN and PISA, they do offer useful information for our teaching, but it's actually this systematic teacher observations and classroom level of objective data that we know offers the most information for teachers. And it's when we do this that we collect the information, that we see the diverse needs of the students in our class. And we know that teaching to the middle is an old adage, and it just doesn't prove to be effective. We all know that with any time in the classroom. So therefore, we need to differentiate our teaching so that all of our students will learn. If we differentiate, we can do it in two ways. Differentiating our instruction. One can argue that our classes are more diverse than ever. And I think, look, if I'm to be honest, often differentiating sometimes seems like a daunting topic, as one perhaps feels sometimes unattainable. The reality of differentiating 25, instructions to one piece of work is often sometimes just not part of the equation. And I think it can be hard work, but we do know that it's necessary. Differentiating the content, and this can come in many ways. So we can modify the instruction in student groupings. We can tier the leveled activities according to interest centres. We can problem solve. We can also differentiate based on student learning needs and interests. And we can also do things by considering the learning environment, whether we have students work as individuals or collaborative or whole class group. Also, another important way to do that is to differentiate assessment by considering different types of assessment strategies. The roadblocks to differentiation. And I think if we take a moment, the questions over here on the left-hand side, if you read those and have a pause perhaps to think about where you sit on your continuum of differentiation, and what will it take for you to move, and what's in your way of differentiating your curriculum, and how can we remove them? Well, I think the chart here with Ed Surge's recent research, the findings to anybody who spent time in a classroom are not surprising, the total lack of time. And I think the other one here that I'm quite passionate about is no time to collaborate. It's very difficult to differentiate our programs if we're doing it all on our own. So teachers who have time to collaborate as a faculty, a year level group, I think that becomes really important to work out how we're actually going to get the content through at different levels. And of course, the constant lack of time that teachers juggle, and perhaps even more so in our current climate. So a key question then becomes, how do we differentiate when we don't have the data? But I suppose the other question is, what if you could get the data automatically and instantly? And I think that's what we're getting at here. So EdTech's not about doing things better. It's about doing better things. So the innovation of auto marking and data collection can truly lift the way we teach. Creating differentiated learning plans for our students is what we all need. We know that we need to do, and we know that it makes the biggest difference to our students' learning. We all try to do the best we can, no matter how experienced we are in the classroom, but it reverts back to my introductory point, that teaching is a human practice. So I suppose it's best if we think about it, let the computers do the adding and let the teachers teach. So auto marking gives teachers more time, therefore enabling teachers to engage in more social educational activities that the computer cannot simply support. Teachers can invest in higher order thinking and better prioritise their skill set. If we can eliminate the unnecessary marking, so the teacher can analyse the data and infer meaning and inform our practice, plan curriculum, affirm our students' strengths, and then we can plan for the weaknesses. The detailed data that an automated program can offer is only bound by the coding. And I think this really gets to the nut of it, really. We know that it's the analysis of the data that needs to be translated into practice. And it's this analysis that will transform the way we teach. And I've been transparent from the start. Obviously, working for Neap, we have these innovations, we have these programs, and this is the sort of data that Neap does provide, and other platforms do similar. So it's not just about collecting the data, it's actually what we do with it. Educational experts have flagged that this is the major shift that we find ourselves in teaching. With the access to data becoming quicker and easier, teachers need more time in terms of how to analyse this data and how it can influence and frame our teaching. The following are a few ways that data is going to help education. And I was going to say in the near future, but that's actually not true. It's actually doing it at the moment. And I could only see it moving even more quicker in this direction. So when we think about if we have the data, it's automatic, it's collated for us. We're no longer taking the wads of trial exam papers home to mark, taking them to the car, to the lounge room, back to the car, to the classroom, back to the students. I think if we can get that data automatically collated for us, it makes us, as teachers, we can target our teaching. We can see the weaknesses and the strengths of our class and target intervention and also improvements. We've talked about differentiated learning plans, but I think the way to actually articulate that a little bit better is that if we have data, we can scaffold the differentiated learning plans with evidence, and it's reducing that workload for teachers. The other core point here about data for immediate feedback, one core well-researched point about feedback being useful for students is that it needs to be prompt. That's the key goal about feedback being useful. And the time it takes for a teacher to deliver quality feedback is quite lengthy. A computer program can do that instantly. And so I think if the feedback becomes instant, it is obviously more relevant and it has a greater impact to student learning. Another key part that I really like is that data for personalising pace. Students can travel at their own pace. We know that traveling, teaching to the middle, that everybody doing things at the same time is just not effective. So if someone can personalize their pace, it's no longer isolating. We also have obviously data for curriculum planning. When you're looking as a department level or an individual teacher, if I was to sit with the other psych teachers, you can plan in terms of the strengths and the weaknesses, the activities, the focus areas. It becomes data for also professional conversations. And this is what I think becomes really important for teaching. We can collaborate with evidence. We're not just guessing. We're not hearsaying. It's evidence-based, directed professional conversations. And the other really thing when we talk about data can historically perhaps be seen as a dirty word in education when we're looking at performance management and school rankings. I think we need to move away from that connotation of data in education, and we look at data for motivation. And I think if we can learners see the impact and the growth of their scores, and when we're talking about growth mindset, that's what data can actually have a really positive impact on. And the key obviously about data for efficiency, it saves us hours of time. Yeah, I think that goes without saying as well. So the key adage here, data is only as good as what you do with it. And I refer back to our initial thought that the purpose of including new innovations to teaching should reduce our manual workload and allow teachers to work smarter. Auto marking and data collection allow teachers to do this without adding to their workload. And these two innovations remove the barriers for teachers to differentiate their learning. We know that differentiation is the key to excellence in teaching and learning, and it has the greatest impact on student learning. So when we're considering innovations to our practice, something I'll pose. So does differentiation fit with your teaching pedagogy? And does it fit with your school priorities? And a reminder that it's the analysis of the data that becomes important. I think what I will do now is, obviously we can see that Neap is offering some trials to have a look at perhaps a demo of what we offer. And I think I'm very cognizant of the time. And what I might actually do is go straight to our questions to see if we've reached and provoked enough thought, which I hope we have. Do we give enough time and space for professional conversation that consider differentiation, discussing data? Well, I think that's a fantastic question, Roland. And I would have to say, in my humble opinion, that no, we are not given enough time for professional conversations. And I think with all of the talk in terms of evidence-based teaching, and we know how important it is, we're not given the space to actually explore the data, to explore the analysis of the data. I would love that to change. And perhaps if we don't spend so much time on marking and manual skills, perhaps that's a shift that we will find that will benefit teaching, that we will have time to speak as professionals, and we will have time to talk about how we intervene at a much more evidence-based conversation. So I hope that this is where we're headed. There's no other, oh, here we go. How can we avoid a datafied student and gain an idea about the real student behind the wall of data? Anonymous, fantastic, thank you. A datafied student, well, I think perhaps as I'm sitting here pondering harsher lockdown rules, a datafied student is something that's frightful to me. I think data, we need to use it. And I suppose I refer back to what I said before. Data is not a dirty word. Data can be something that we use as motivation, and we use to frame a growth mindset. And I think most of my teaching experience is at the upper end of secondary. And I think that's where it really becomes evidence that data does become a motivation. So a datafied student, I hope we never get to that. And if we talk about teaching being celebrated as a real humanistic skill, then I don't think we're in harm of that. So is the product available from a personal subscription? It is a school subscription, and I think anybody who wants to find out more about Neap's products, I would encourage you to go to the website and obviously the trial demo that was also on the slides before. So I did mention it before, we are going to record this, and we will forward the recording here so that you can follow up. In a primary school setting. Well, unfortunately, I'm not a primary school teacher. However, data like this comes from lots of platforms from a primary school setting. How can we use it? Well, the ideas that I mentioned before in terms of using data for targeted teaching, using data to inform your teaching about your curriculum areas and areas of weakness, that would obviously be where at a primary school setting it becomes even more important. Can I explain how auto marking works? Well, usually I'm not broadcasting in turn from my dining room where I would have a tech person with me, but the real answer to that would be from the coding and the platform. That is auto marking. In terms of how it works, you need to be able to submit digital tests, and the coding of the program auto marks it for you, and that's what brings you the data. I think how can a computer assess conceptual and perceptive thinking? Well, it doesn't. It only marks in terms of keywords and whatever it is that you put into the computer program. But as you would know, if you've been up to date what's going on, and anyone who's been involved in the NAPLAN, you know that NAPLAN is now moving to an online forum, a digital format. And obviously it's with the coding. So you can code it in terms of multiple choice, short answer questions, anything that's a longer conceptual perceptive thinking, like a long English essay, that still rests with you guys. The content, we are the subject specialists. And I think as much as auto marking can be amazing, there is always a space for teachers having to do marking the old-fashioned way, because that's where we get those nuances from students. But is there a need to do that for every single piece of work that you mark? Well, my answer is no. So I think, like many things, we need to balance out when we use innovations, when we use technology in terms of our classroom. There are some things that are better done by us, but we don't need to do it that way all the time. I'll just move my, here we are. Does this platform only apply to Neap resources? Are we able to modify these resources? Well, I think that's probably something, again, that I would encourage you to do a trial demo for Neap, and you can see if that's something that fits within your subject or your year level that you teach. And how are we? Thank you. Very thought-provoking. Well, that's lovely. I really hope that it has been thought-provoking. And I think perhaps what I will do is finish up here in terms of, I would like to thank everybody for putting aside half an hour of their time tonight. There is a lot going on, and I think just the fact that you've decided to listen to something that I hope can contribute to your own teaching is a real credit to yourselves. And I think collaboratively, if we can share these sort of resources, it takes away that burden. And in a world that's changing ever so rapidly, it's more and more important. I encourage you, obviously, to touch base with me on LinkedIn and to follow Neap in terms of their Facebook and LinkedIn page. And yeah, I wish you well. I hope we are all kind to ourselves, And I really appreciate you listening. So thank you, everybody. And I hope to hear from you all at some point. Thank you.